So have you ever just stopped and wondered if love,
Mm.
all the intense feelings, the drama,
Yeah.
is it actually real?
Mm.
Or is it maybe just like a really convincing illusion our brains cook up?
Yeah.
It's a thought that definitely crosses your mind, right?
Mm.
Especially after a tough breakup or reading about brain chemistry.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge question, isn't it? And for this deep dive, we've gathered, well, a whole bunch of different takes on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we dug into articles coming from psychology, neuroscience, even evolutionary biology, philosophy, and interestingly, visual illusions too, to see if they offer any clues.
Okay, visual illusions. That sounds intriguing. So the mission today isn't really to land on a simple yes or no answer.
Right.
It's more about unpacking this whole idea of love being an illusion. Why do people think that? What's the counter argument?
Yeah.
And hopefully everyone listening can sort of form their own view.
Exactly. Help people navigate their own thoughts on it.
Okay, so let's start there. Why does this idea that love might just be an illusion even, pop up? What fuels that doubt?
Well, a big driver is definitely the science, particularly neuroscience. When we fall in love, you get this rush, right?
Mhm.
That activates the brain's reward pathways.
Mhm.
And these are the very same pathways involved in things like, well, addiction or even just basic pleasure responses.
Right, I've heard that comparison.
Yeah, studies like the ones with prairie voles at Emory, they show a clear dopamine surge. It's this intense neurochemical thing driving desire and craving for the other person.
Which does sound, a little bit like addiction when you put it that way, that intense focus, needing to be near them.
It's a natural parallel to draw, for sure. And then you layer on evolutionary biology.
Okay.
From that perspective, thinkers like Helen Fisher argue that romantic love is basically a survival mechanism.
A survival mechanism. How so?
Well, it's a neurochemical process designed to push us towards mating, towards forming pair bonds strong enough to raise children together. It's about ultimately getting our genes passed on.
So the amazing feelings are just bait. Nature's way to trick us into caring up.
Kind of, yeah. If you take that purely evolutionary view, the feelings serve a biological purpose.
Okay. What else?
Then there's the psychological angle, specifically idealization.
Putting someone on a pedestal.
Exactly. Research, like a study from 2020, showed we tend to downplay flaws and really amplify the good stuff in people we're attracted to.
Yeah.
We project our hopes and ideals onto them, so we're not always seeing the complete picture, maybe.
Seeing the version we want to see. And I guess when that image cracks.
That's exactly when it can feel like an illusion. The infatuation cools, you see the person more realistically, flaws and all, and you think, wait, who was I actually in love with? Was it just this perfect image I created?
Yeah, that makes sense. And let's be real, just life experience feeds into this too, right?
Totally.
Breakups hurt, betrayal, the way intense passion just naturally fades over time. The divorce rate in the U.S. is what, around 39%?
That's significant, yeah.
So when those amazing feelings disappear, or worse, turn sour, it's pretty understandable to look back and think, was any of that real? Was it just temporary?
It can definitely lead you to question the authenticity of it all. You might tell yourself, oh, it wasn't real love anyway, partly, maybe, as a way to cope with the pain, to minimize the loss.
Right, a defense mechanism.
Mm-hmm. And we can't ignore social and cultural influences either.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, think about the whole soulmate narrative, the idea of effortless, perfect, meant-to-be love that we see in movies and, stories.
Like the fairy tale version.
Yeah. It sets these incredibly high, often unrealistic expectations. So when our actual relationships involve, like, work and compromise and disagreement.
They feel flawed or not the real thing compared to the fantasy.
Exactly. It can make actual love feel like the illusion because it doesn't match that perfect script.
Okay, so that's a pretty compelling case for why someone might feel disillusioned. Brain chemistry, evolution, idealization, painful experiences, cultural pressure.
It paints a picture, definitely. But, and this is crucial, our sources also offer really strong arguments for love being real, something much deeper than just a trick.
Okay, good. Because that first part was getting a little bleak.
Yeah.
So what's the counter argument? How is love real?
Well, let's go back to the brain science for a sec. Yes, reward pathways are active, like in addiction.
Right.
But research shows love also ramps up activity in brain areas linked to social cognition.
Social cognition.
Meaning things like empathy, understanding someone else's feelings, their perspective, building genuine connection. That's different from addiction, which is often more self-focused. Love seems geared towards bonding with another person.
Okay. So it's not just about getting a hit of dopamine, it's about connection too. That feels different.
It is different. And remember that idealization, the positive illusion thing.
Yeah, seeing your partner through rose-tinted glasses.
Well, some researchers argue that's not necessarily delusion, but actually functional. Believing in your partner's good qualities, even slightly overestimating them, can act like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
How so?
It encourages them to live up to that positive view. It fosters growth, optimism, and happiness in the relationship. It's not blindness, it's focusing on and nurturing the good.
So seeing the best in them can actually help bring out the best. That's hopeful.
It is. It suggests that optimism isn't detachment from reality, but maybe a helpful part of reality in a relationship.
Okay, but what about the fading passion thing? That initial intensity does often cool down. Doesn't that suggest it was temporary, maybe illusory?
It's true. The nature of the feeling often changes. That obsessive can't eat, can't sleep phase usually evolves.
Right.
But studies on long-term couples show that deep romantic love, attachment, sexual attraction, emotional commitment, these can and do last for years, even decades.
So it changes but doesn't disappear.
Exactly. It might shift from, say, a wildfire to a steady hearth fire. Both are real fire, just different expressions. It becomes perhaps more stable, comfortable, intimate, still very real love.
I like that analogy, the hearth fire.
Okay. And we also have to remember love isn't just romantic love.
True. Family, friends.
Precisely. The deep bonds we have with family members, close friends, are those illusions? Most people would say absolutely not. They're profoundly real and vital for our well-being.
Yeah, imagine life without those connections. It feels fundamentally lacking.
Which brings us to another key point.
Okay.
Love, in its broader sense, belonging, connection, acceptance, intimacy, seems to be a fundamental human need.
Like food and water almost, on a psychological level.
Pretty much, yeah. Our sources really emphasize this. We need these things to thrive, to grow, to find meaning. Lacking them often leads to, well, negative mental states, loneliness, depression. It's hard to dismiss something so essential as just an illusion.
And doesn't the research on health back this up? I think our sources mentioned that big Harvard study.
Yes. The Harvard study of adult development, running for over 85 years now, it consistently finds that strong, positive relationships are one of the biggest predictors of long-term health and happiness.
Wow. So actual physical benefits.
Definitely. Things like lower blood pressure, reduced risk of heart disease, diabetes, stronger immune systems, even increased longevity, plus better mental health, resilience.
Okay, that's pretty concrete. Illusions don't usually lower your blood pressure.
Probably not. And another thing, maintaining love, especially the long-term romantic kind, isn't passive. It's not just a feeling that happens to you.
Right, it takes work.
It absolutely does. Our sources talk about conscious effort, choice, sacrifice, forgiveness, patience, actively nurturing the connection. These are actions, commitments. That feels much more substantial than a fleeting illusion.
That definitely rings true. Anyone who's been in a relationship for a while knows it requires actual effort.
And the fact that so many couples do maintain that deep intimacy, trust, and commitment long after the initial honeymoon phase fades, that also argues against love being just that early idealization. It evolves into something else, something sturdy.
Okay, so we've got brain science pointing to connection, positive illusions being helpful, lasting love, other forms of love, it being a fundamental need with real health benefits, and the active choice involved. That's a strong case for real.
It is. It presents a much richer picture.
Now, you mentioned philosophy earlier. Did the philosophers we looked at weigh in on this illusion idea?
They did, and predictably, they didn't all agree.
Figures.
Our sources mentioned Schopenhauer, for instance. He basically saw romantic love as a trick of nature, a biological con job.
Like a con job.
Yeah, like a temporary madness orchestrated by our genes just to get us to procreate. He thought it clouded our judgment and served a purely reproductive function, even if it felt profound at the time.
Wow, cheerful guy. So for him, definitely an illusion masking a biological urge.
Pretty much. But then you have others, like Kierkegaard or Erich Fromm.
Okay.
They saw love very differently. Kierkegaard viewed it as something fundamental to existence, giving life meaning and authenticity. Fromm saw love as like a core human capacity, something essential for fulfillment, but also something that needs to be learned and practiced, like an art.
So for them, it's not a trick, but maybe the whole point, or at least a crucial part of being human. That's a huge difference.
A massive contrast, yeah. It really shows how this can be approached from completely different angles. And just looping back quickly to psychology and those cognitive biases.
Right, the idealization thing.
Yeah, it's worth remembering that we do sometimes project fantasies or overlook flaws, especially at the start. Our brains might be filling in the blanks a bit.
Trying to make reality fit the dream.
Kind of. But the key point, again, is that real, enduring love seems to be what happens after that initial phase. It's about seeing the whole person and choosing the connection anyway.
Okay, so bringing this all together, if someone listening is really wrestling with this, feeling like maybe love is just an illusion for them, what are some practical ways to think about it or deal with it?
Well, our sources offered some really good suggestions. First off, it's important to actually acknowledge and process any past pain related to relationships.
Deal with the baggage, basically.
Yeah, sometimes believing love is an illusion is a shield against getting hurt again. So allowing yourself to feel those past hurts, maybe through journaling or just reflection, is key for healing.
Makes sense. You can't move forward if you're still protecting yourself from the past.
Exactly. Another big one is to actively challenge unrealistic expectations about love.
Like the fairy tale stuff we talked about.
Right. The idea that there's one perfect soulmate, that love should be effortless, that passion never ever fades. These beliefs set you up for disappointment. It's more helpful to see love as something you build and nurture with someone, requiring effort from both sides.
Shifting from finding the one to building the one relationship.
That's a great way to put it. And related to that is cultivating a generally more optimistic outlook towards love.
How do you do that if you're feeling cynical?
It takes practice. Consciously challenge those negative thoughts when they pop up. Look for examples of healthy, functioning relationships around you. Focus on the possibility of positive connection rather than dwelling on past negatives. It's kind of like cognitive reframing.
Training your brain to see the potential.
And of course, therapy can be incredibly helpful here.
Right.
Talking to a professional can provide a safe space to explore these doubts, work through past trauma, and develop healthier relationship patterns and beliefs. And our sources noted, the rise of online therapy makes this more accessible too.
That's a good point. Accessibility is key. Now, you mentioned visual illusions earlier. How did that connect? It seemed like an unusual source.
It was a really neat metaphor. Think about visual illusions like those pictures that look like they're moving but aren't, or colors that seem to bleed into areas they're not actually in. These show us that our perception isn't just a passive recording of reality, right? Our brain actively interprets signals, fills in gaps, makes assumptions based on context.
So, like love, our perception of it isn't necessarily 100% objective reality.
Exactly. Maybe early on, our brain fills in the blanks to create that idealized image. Maybe our feelings bleed over, coloring how we see someone's flaws, like ambiguous images that you can see in two different ways.
Your interpretation of a partner's actions can depend on your own mood or perspective.
Precisely. So the analogy suggests that even if our experience of love involves subjective perception and brain interpretation, that doesn't make the experience itself or its impact on us any less real or meaningful. Our brain is constructing it, but it feels real.
Okay, I get that. The feeling is real even if the why is complex or partly subjective.
Right. And one source brought up that quote from Louis de Bernier.
Oh, yeah.
He distinguishes between being in love, which he calls that temporary, exciting, almost irrational madness.
The fireworks phase.
Yeah. And love itself, which is what's left after that initial madness burns off. He says that kind of love is more like roots growing together, needing work, understanding, commitment.
So maybe the illusion isn't love itself, but the idea that love is only that initial, intense being in love feeling.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to frame it, yeah. And that ties into the danger of those overly romanticized ideals we keep mentioning.
How so?
Because if we only value that initial high, we're bound to be disappointed when relationships naturally evolve. It leads us to think something's wrong, maybe even that the love wasn't real, when it's actually just changing form.
Like expecting a movie montage, see, but real life has, laundry and disagreement.
Exactly. So challenging those unhelpful beliefs is vital. Beliefs like love should be effortless, your partner must complete you, passion should never fade, you should never argue, there's one perfect person out there.
Those sound exhausting, honestly.
They are. They set an impossible standard. Replacing them with more realistic ideas that love takes work, partners complement but don't complete, passion evolves, disagreement is normal, connection is built, not found perfectly formed, that's much healthier.
And wasn't there something about letting go of the one? Esther Perel's idea?
Yes, exactly. She talks about how much pressure that puts on finding this mythical soulmate. She emphasizes embracing the complexity, the messiness, the effort involved in actually building a life and a deep connection with another real, flawed human being.
It's less about destiny, more about choice and work.
Precisely. And ultimately, as one source highlighted, love is also deeply personal. We get to define what it means to us based on our own standards and experiences.
And recognize it in all its forms, not just romance.
Absolutely. Friendship, family, community, it all counts.
So, okay, wrapping this up, that initial question, is love real or an illusion? It sounds like the answer is complicated.
Definitely not a simple yes or no. It seems whether love feels like an illusion often depends heavily on how you define love, what you've experienced, and what you expect from it.
Right.
While, yeah, the early stages have clear biological drivers, and our perceptions are definitely subjective.
Mhm.
Just dismissing all love as an illusion seems to ignore its profound reality.
The emotional reality, the psychological importance, the social bonds, the health benefits.
Exactly. Those things are undeniably real. To discount them entirely feels like missing a huge part of the human experience.
So maybe some aspects of how we think about love, the fairy tale versions, are illusory.
Mm.
But the core need for connection, the deep affection, the commitment, that seems rock solid.
That sums it up well, I think. Which leaves us with maybe a final thought for everyone listening to chew on.
Okay.
Thinking about everything we've discussed, the science, the feelings, the philosophy, what parts of love as you understand it might, for you, feel like illusions? And conversely, what elements feel absolutely undeniably real and essential to your life, to your experience of being human?
That's a good takeaway. Encouraging that personal reflection. Because ultimately how we answer that question for ourselves is what really matters.